Today, we're gonna go into our cheese experiment, because if you've been watching our videos, you should have seen our make room and our age room and see how they really make those big wheels of cheese. But today we're gonna break it down a little bit more, break it down smaller, explain some more things about what's going on. So first, we have a jar of our Jersey milk. And if you guys have been watching, you know we have Jersey cows because their milk is really high in butter fat. And the butter fat is that thick, yummy stuff that really helps the creaminess of our cheese. And our milk we use is the raw milk. And so the raw milk still has some bacteria in it. And it has some bad bacteria, but it also has some really good friendly bacteria. And that friendly bacteria is called culture. And the culture is then what gives the milk and eventually the cheese flavor. Without the culture, there really isn't any flavor to the cheese or to the milk. In this jar of that Jersey milk, the raw Jersey milk, there's some things in it besides our friendly bacteria. So if you were to take a glass of our Jersey milk, our raw Jersey milk, and you were to look at it really closely, you'd see some blobs of fat. And you would see some protein. And that fat and that protein, they're just hanging out in water. So our dairy cows, right, they drink like a bathtub full of water. All that water, a lot of it's going to make that milk. So mostly milk when you drink it is water with some fat and protein just kind of hanging out in it. And then there's some friendly bacteria, there's calcium, there's some other things in it. So what we're gonna do today is take this raw milk, turn it into cheese. So the first step is to pour it into a vessel. And now we're gonna have to take this milk and heat it up to about 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius. So we're gonna go into the kitchen. Starting at 50, got a ways to go. Getting close. All right, we got it to temperature. Here we go. So we have some milk that we got to about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the goal. And it's still just a glass of milk with the water, fat, and protein kind of hanging out in it. So I'm gonna take this spoon and I'm gonna drop it in, and we're just gonna see if it floats, sinks, or does both. So, kind of does both. Kind of the end is sinking in, but the top is kind of floating up top. So just kind of keep that in your head, because we're going to need to know that in a moment. And now, if we were in the cheese house, this is where they would add some more culture. Depending what type of cheese they were making would depend what type of culture they were adding to the milk. But because we're not in the cheese house and we're just doing an experiment, we're not going to add any more culture. What we are going to add now is some rennet. So rennet is an enzyme, and enzymes break things down. So in our glass of milk, it's going to break down that fat and protein. In your stomach, you had some enzymes that are breaking down your lunch or your breakfast or your dinner and turning it into nutrients. So when we pour this rennet in, the enzymes are going to start working with the fat and protein. We're going to give it a little stir. And we're going to let it sit. So while it's sitting, the enzyme's breaking things down, and hopefully it's taking that fat and the protein and it's squishing it together, it's coagulating it. Rennet, those enzymes are coagulating that fat and protein, and hopefully turning that milk into curds and whey. And the curds are going to be the chunky part that becomes our cheese, which is our product. And the whey can be used in a lot of different things. Whey protein shakes, it's kind of the extra protein to build muscles, but we don't want it. So for us, it's kind of a waste. And so it is the byproduct. Like that. While we're waiting for this to do its thing, I'm going to share a little legend with you. Alright, so legends are stories that may or may not really be true, but it explains how things happened. So this legend for how cheese was made was a long time ago, when there was lots of herds people, right? Shepherds. And shepherds, what they did is they just walked with their sheep out into the big fields and far away from civilization. And at that time, they didn't have our plastic water bottles. They actually used everything of their animal to carry liquid. And so one of the things they used was a bladder. And the bladder wasn't actually a bladder. That's what they called it. It was actually the stomach, usually, of a calf. And inside the stomach of a calf is that enzyme. So our rennet actually comes from the lining of a calf's stomach. That's where we get it from. And so those shepherds would have that bladder, the calf's stomach, that would be attached to a string, and they would store their liquid in there. So usually, a lot of times, because they were dealing with sheep, they had milk. So they would keep that milk in that bladder, and then they'd go hiking. Off with their sheep, out in the sunshine, hanging out, doing their thing, and eventually, they would get to a nice sunny spot. So the legend goes, there was this shepherd, and he was out there walking with his sheep, with his milk in his bladder, that calf stomach. And he was hiking, and it got lunchtime, and there's this gorgeous, beautiful tree. And so he sat next to that tree, ate some of his lunch, and went to drink some of that milk. But when he went to drink it, it was kind of like chunky. There was some liquid in it, it was chunky. It wasn't bad, it still kind of tasted like milk, but it was still kind of chunky. And so he kind of poured it into his hand, you know how we're curious. Poured it in our hand, and the chunks was in there, and he kind of played with it. It's like, it was almost like Play-Doh. And so he kind of played with it, mushed it in his hand, kind of like made cubes, watching the sheep, kind of doing his thing. And then after playing with it for a while, he was ready to get back to his sheep, and he just kind of left it next to that tree, and went on with his day. And weeks later, I think it was actually many months later, he was back to that same area, because the sheep can't go back right away. They need a new pasture. So he was finally back to that same big pasture, and that gorgeous tree at lunchtime. Once again, he had his container, his bladder, full of milk. And he went and he sat down again, went to drink again, and was eating his lunch and looked down, and he saw that cube that he had played with before, but now instead of squishing away, it was actually kind of hard. It was kind of brownish on the outside, and he was just curious. He kind of broke it open, and the inside was still white. He smelled it. It smelled decent. And so then he decided to take a bite. And it still tasted all right. And it was kind of the start of cheese, because they didn't have any other way to preserve things to keep that milk. And so they would put kind of that milk, that sheep milk, into those calf stomachs, put them out in the sun, get it so it was chunky, squish it together, and then let it sit. And then it's kind of evolved from there. So that is the legend of how cheese came to be. So now let's check on our cheese. So I have that spoon again, and now I'm gonna drop it in and see what happens. I'm gonna scoot it forward. spoon is now really floating on top. If we kind of wiggle this, see it's kind of made a jello-y substance. And so our milk, our fat and protein, has coagulated together. So I'm gonna take the spoon out. What we need to do now, and you might have seen in the other video at the make room, is they take the wires and they kind of cut everything up. So I'm gonna take this knife and I'm now gonna cut up the coagulated milk. And hopefully we'll see some chunks which are the curds and the liquid that is the whey. All right, you see it? All right, so we got that liquid that's the whey and the chunks that are the curds. And so we don't need that whey, right? That byproduct, we don't want it. And so we're gonna separate the curds from the whey. And again, in the cheese house, in that make room there, that huge big silver machine that does this separating and then squishes it. I don't have that machine, so we're gonna do it like this. Kind of pour it through this filter, kind of has a gag. Splatters. So now the curds are coming out. We made a lot of cheese today. Alright, so now we just gotta separate the whey from the curds. So it's gonna take a little bit. Again, in the cheese house, is hours. 12 hours, 15 hours, you probably do more than I do. Alright, I'm gonna try to squish it. Probably some curds will come out on the outside, that's okay. So we separated most of the whey from the curds. There's still a good amount in there. That's why in the cheese sauce they do it a lot longer. So we're gonna plop this on a plate and see what happens. We have a wheel of cheese, kind of. All right, so the whey is gonna keep coming out. But that wheel is now a wheel of curds, really. It didn't have that extra culture in it. We also are not gonna age it. So in our cheese house, right, they would take that smushed curds with the extra culture and then they would age it. Depending on which cheese determines how long. So this is now considered just a curd cake. So we can though, and still taste it. Some people really like it. You add some salt to it. More whey is gonna keep coming out. And we have a little curd. And if we were that shepherd, right, we would have squished this all. Really made it hard and squishy. But then you can eat it. Mmm. And it tastes like warm milk. A little chunky. All done.